CLO3.3, compute gross pay on the basis of time. Okay, when you have employees, you must decide how often they're going to get a paycheck. And I know in the UAE, it's very common that you get your paycheck at the end of each month. So it's very common in the UAE that you get paid monthly. If you get paid monthly, that's 12 paychecks in a year. However, there's a lot of countries and a lot of places where you don't get paychecks once a month. They pay you different ways. So we'll talk about all those different ways. Here's an example where someone gets 50,000 US dollars per year, but let's look in the first case when they are paid weekly. If you're paid weekly at the end of every week, that's 52 times in a year. So each paycheck at the end of each week would be your annual pay, your yearly pay of 50,000, cut into 52 paychecks, which ends up being $961. My calculator says 0.538, so we'll round to $0.54 per week. So you're getting paid at the end of each week. That's how much your paycheck would be. There are some companies, though, that decide to pay you bi-weekly. Bi-weekly means every 2 weeks. That means 1 week, yes, a paycheck, the next week, no, the next week, yes, the next week, no. So instead of getting paid every week 52 times, we're going to get paid half that amount. So 52 divided by 2 is 26 paychecks. So we cut our annual salary of 50,000 into 26 paychecks, and that ends up being 1923. My calculator says 0.076, so that's 0.08, rounding to 2 decimal places, every 2 weeks. Okay, and the last way that is common to get paid is called semi-monthly. Semi-monthly means twice a month, the middle of the month and the end of the month. So instead of once a month for 12 months, it's twice a month for 12 months, which would be 24 paychecks. So we take our annual salary and we cut it into 24 paychecks. And that would be per paycheck 2083.33, and that's twice a month that you would get that paycheck. Okay, and the last one is the UAE way, where they take your annual salary of 50,000, you get paid one time each month, so you cut it into 12 paychecks, giving you an amount of 4,166.67 each month. So those are the different ways you can get paid. Okay, let's look at this example. We have a guy who's college educated and he accepts a job for $32 a day, 12 hours per day, 6 days per week. And then the first question is, what is his hourly pay? So his hourly pay would be his daily pay divided by the number of hours per day that he works. So in this case, his daily pay is $32. The number of hours per day that he works is 12 hours. And so we would get that his hourly pay is $2.67 per hour. Okay, then it asks for the weekly pay. So the weekly pay would be the daily pay. Now you might think multiply by 7 days per week, but it says he does not work 7 days per week. He only works 6 days per week. So you're going to multiply by the number of days worked per week. So in this case, his daily pay is $32. He works 6 days per week. And so we will get a weekly pay of $192 per week. Lastly, it asks for annual pay. Annual means in the whole year. How much does he get paid in the whole year? And so you have some choices here. You might think to yourself, oh, do the daily pay times 365. But we shouldn't do that, again, because he does not work every single day. So we'll do the daily pay. What we could do is the weekly pay. And there's no mention that he takes any weeks off. So it's the weekly pay times 52 weeks per year. So in this case, it will be 192 times 52, and we would get an annual pay of $9,984 per year. That is not a very good salary. Thankfully, we get higher salaries here in the UAE. Okay, these next few problems are going to talk about what is called overtime. Now, overtime is the idea that sometimes in a job you have to work more than is usually required according to your contract. Maybe sometimes they ask you to work on an Eid, or sometimes they ask you to work on a Saturday, or sometimes they just ask you to work more hours than you normally work. And the idea is the management of the company, the boss, should reward you extra when you have to work extra more than what your contract says. So we're going to keep it simple in this course. And basically, overtime is defined as any time you have to work more than 40 hours. They consider 40 hours in a week to be the normal, regular amount of work. And if you have to work more than that, it's called overtime. Now, obviously, when you have your own company, you can decide what is overtime and what is not. But for this course, we keep it simple. We say anytime you work more than 40 hours per week, that's overtime work. And the way you get paid is always, for the sake of this course, we'll do it always the same. Obviously, in real life, it could be different. But in this course, overtime pay, the rate is going to be what's called time and a half. And I'll explain that. And time and a half means that whatever the regular pay is, you are going to multiply it by 1.5 to get the overtime pay. Okay, so as a simple example, if your regular pay is 100 dirhams per hour, your overtime pay would be 1.5 times 100, or 150 dirhams per hour. But we'll do this example below and to show you what I mean. So when you do overtime questions, it's quite easy if you do it with this table I'm about to show you. You make a row called regular pay and a row called overtime pay. Okay? And then you should make 3 columns. And here is what you should label your 3 columns. Label it hours, rate, and totals. Now, your regular hours for every question in this course will always be 40. That's given. You have to just know that. Okay? Then you look at the total hours and you say, okay, the overtime hours is the total hours, and you subtract those 40 regular hours. So in this case, 61.5 minus 40, we did an additional 21.5 hours of work over and above what was expected. The regular rate is always given in the question. So in this case, it's $9 per hour. So when we want to figure out the overtime rate, what we do is we do what's called time and a half. So we do the regular rate times 1.5. So in this case, 9 times 1.5 is 13.5. I say 13.50 because we're talking about money. Money always has 2 decimal places. So there we go. Then when we want to figure out the totals, we just multiply straight across. 40 hours times $9 per hour is $360 of regular pay. And then 21.5 hours times 13.50 per hour is $290.25 in overtime pay. Now lastly, they might ask you for what's called the gross pay. Gross pay is just a fancy way of saying total pay. So what is the regular pay plus the overtime pay added together? You just add these 2 columns and you will get a gross pay or total pay of $650.25. So that's how you do an overtime problem. Okay, let's do another question. It says Jill worked 52 hours. Automatically, I know this is an overtime question because she worked more than 40 hours. Okay, so since I know it's an overtime question, I should make my table. Regular pay is the first row, overtime is the second row, and then I will make 3 columns. The 3 columns are hours, rate, and totals. Now you always start off with regular hours being 40. And to figure out the overtime hours, you take the total hours that she worked and then you subtract 40. So the total hours is written right there, 52 minus 40. That means there were 12 hours of overtime that Jill worked. And then we move on to the regular rate. It's given in the question, $10 per hour. And so if we want to know the overtime rate, we do the regular rate, and it says the pay rate is time and a half, and that means 1.5 times the regular rate, so $10 per hour times 1.5, it ends up being $15 per hour. And now when we want to know the totals, we just multiply straight across. Her regular pay, 40 hours times $10 per hour is $400 regular pay. Her overtime pay is 12 hours at a rate of $15 per hour. That is $180 per hour for overtime. Sorry, not per hour, $180 total for her overtime. If we want to know the gross pay, which is just a fancy way of saying total pay, you just add those two together, the regular pay plus the overtime pay, and you end up getting $580 in gross pay. Okay, in this problem, they gave us the hours that Pete worked each day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So before we go forward, let's figure out his total hours. When you add them all together, you end up getting 38 hours. Now, before I move on, I think to myself, is this an overtime question? And the answer is no, because Pete did not work more than 40 hours. Okay, so given that it's not an overtime question, Pete didn't work more than 40 hours, he worked less than 40 hours. This is just a regular payment by time. He worked 38 hours. His rate per hour is $7.95. We multiply those two numbers and we get that his total pay should be $302. My calculator says 0.1, but for money we say 2 decimal places, so $302.10. Okay, let's do one last question. Again, they gave us the hours by day that Tagney worked, and we'll see how many hours in the week Tagney worked by adding those together. And when I add them together, I get 46 total hours. So the question is this an overtime question? And the answer is yes. Because this person worked more than 40 hours, this is an overtime question. So before I go ahead and fill in all of these boxes, I know I'm going to make myself a table, and that will make everything easier. We'll separate regular pay and overtime pay on 2 rows. And then we will make 3 columns: hours, rate, and totals. Okay, so we always start off, we know that the regular hours are always 40. And the way we figure out the overtime hours is we do the total hours and we subtract 40. So in this case, 46 minus 40 is 6 overtime hours. The regular rate is always given in the question, which in this case, $7.60 per hour. So the way we figure out the overtime rate is we do the regular rate and we times 1.5. So in this case, 7.60 times 1.5, and we get a overtime rate of $11.40 per hour. Then if we want to know the totals, we multiply straight across. So the regular pay would be 40 hours times $7.60 per hour, and we get $304 in regular pay. And then the overtime pay is going to be 6 hours times $11.40 per hour, and we will get $68.40 for the overtime pay. And so lastly, if we want to know the gross pay, which is also total pay, you just add those two numbers up and you end up getting $372.40 for the total gross pay. So let's go back and fill out this table. The regular hours are always 40 if it's an overtime question. So the overtime hours were 6 hours overtime. The overtime rate we calculated to be $11.40, and the gross pay for everything came out to be $372.40.